pleasure to introduce Mayor Dana Williams from Park City. You can see his bio here, and again, there's more in the program. When he got here, I was saying, you know, it's kind of a little bit of serendipity involved because Dana was traveling in China, I believe, on a trade mission with, who was it, from Washington State, and and I guess you got chatting and share your name from Washington State? Dan, that's right. And Dan said, well, NACDEP's holding a conference in Park City. And Mayor Williams said, oh, really? And so they, were exchanging information. And Dana said, well, I'd like to come and welcome the group. So we really appreciate Mayor Williams here. And come on up, Dana.
So you can see how important dress is to the success of a meeting. But for all of you can lose the ties. You don't need them for however long you're here. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting meeting to be in Xi'an, China. We were at the speaking at the first Global Congress on Biodiversity. And as it turned out, there was about 7 conferences: biofuels, biotech, biomedicine, and biodiversity. And when we got the invitation 2.5 months ago, I wrote them back and said, we're deeply honored, but where in the hell did you hear about Park City, Utah? And they wrote back and said, the Secretary General of the United Nations in Rome had heard Park City's story last year and thought your city rocked. And so he is an advisor to this conference, and so we'd like you to come. And needless to say, most of the projects like Daniel's was on the eradication of invasive species and things like that. And then I get up and am talking about, developing sustainable communities. So it was, most of it was science, but they did have at least one person there that was talking about, okay, how do we put science into action in terms of coming up with a city sustainability plan. As you saw on the bio, when I came to Utah, my first job was in the general store. I moved out to a little community about 30 miles from here. I had studied agriculture and plant science at Oregon State and Cal Poly. Moved to Utah in the 70s with very long hair and moved to an all LDS community and was like, dudes, I want to be a farmer. And these guys are like 5th generation, and they said, are you LDS? And I have no clue what that is. And so I found out pretty quick. But anyway, so my first job was in the general store, and then like a couple months later, a job came up as the soil conservation agent for this county. So I applied and got the job and started designing gravity flow sprinkler systems for the ranchers in eastern Summit County here. And then after about 2 years, thought, you know what, I could take better care of our ground. We had bought 30 acres at the time. And I thought, well, I want to get into growing alfalfa. And then by the time I stopped in 1990, I had 350 acres of alfalfa and 500 acres of pasture ground and at least about 1,500 acres of range ground at 50 mama cows. And then when I got the farming award, it was like so cool. I wore a Grateful Dead shirt and my bibbers. It was like, you guys so rock. And they're just looking at me. But anyway, so in 1990, I moved into Park City. And actually, the film business brought my parents to Park City in 1963. My dad was working on Rio Bravo with John Wayne and in southern Utah, and calls my mother and says in West LA and says, I just bought a house in a ghost town for $400. And it's called Park City, and it is a dump, but I love it. And so we came up here, 5 kids from West LA, got to this town and went, get us out of this redneck drunk place. And my dad kept saying, I think something's going to happen here. And needless to say, a lot has happened here. So probably our biggest claim to fame came in 2002 when we welcomed the world here. It was called the Salt Lake Games, but we know the truth. And a little over 50% of the venues and events were held in Park City. We are the home of the U.S. ski and snowboard team, so those are kids that either come here or grow up here. This last Olympics, there was a U.S. Winter Olympic team came from Park City, so phenomenal. I took office 2 weeks before the opening ceremonies. as the mayor. So the very first thing I did was go on with Katie Couric and Al Roker, and they're like, so you play in a rock band? And it's like, yeah. And every day was, oh, you're going to have breakfast with the governor from Korea and lunch with the mayor of Beijing, and tonight the king and queen of Norway are going to be here, and you need to welcome them. And so they would all say, what should we do in your town? Well, come see our band. And so, here's the mayor of Beijing dancing with the Queen of Norway, and you're sitting there playing music going, I love my job. But so anyway, I had the mayor of Beijing in my office, and it was interesting because the security guys all wore Ray-Bans. And I was like, you got to be kidding. But he's looking through my books, and he pulls out the little red book. And he said, you read this book, Quotations of Chairman Mao? And I said, yeah, when I was 15. You know, I grew up in West LA, and I audited a class when I was 15 at UCLA that Angela Davis was teaching on communism. And so he didn't know who Angela Davis was, but he was somewhat impressed that as a kid I would study that. And then he found out that for about 10 years, we have a student exchange program. It's now, this next year will be 20 years old, with a high school in Beijing. And so a few years later, I got an email from him inviting me and my wife to come to China for a month, spend some time at our school, and kind of tour the country, seeing some of their renewable energy and affordable housing projects that they've been doing in China, which was phenomenal. And then got invited back again. So as soon as I left the conference, I went and spent a week with our sister school and meeting with travel agencies in Beijing on how we can get the Chinese to start skiing or coming and seeing the West. That is one of the #1 tourist designations for people from China, is to see the national parks of the West. And I don't know how many times I got asked if I was a cowboy, and I was like, kinda, but not. It's a long story, but anyway, so right after the Olympics, we had the great opportunity to redefine who we were as a community. We had grown really fast. There had been a lot of development, and so I sat down with my department heads and my city manager, and I said, you know, there's this whole idea of sustainable communities that's starting to be talked about. This is 10 years ago, and I would really like to look at that path and what that means to us. And every one of them said, that's not going to happen. We're not going to do anything you want to do. So we fired them all. Sorry, it sucks being the boss. But what I had was I had a group of people that were very good at what they did, but they were at the tail end of their careers. And the idea of moving forward was, no, we're done, we're looking back, we only got a year or two left. And I said, but I'm just getting started, and I want to be known as more than a ski town. So what we did was we got rid of the department head form of government. And for every one of those department heads, we were able to hire 3 mid-level managers that specialized. And so what we used to have was, oh, you're in charge of public works, but we're going to put affordable housing and open space preservation on your plate. Well, that person didn't care about affordable housing or open space. That wasn't their forte. So when we got rid of the department head system, we hired specialists, seniors housing, diversity, and we created a Department of Sustainability in the city government. And we put economic development and open space preservation, environmental issues. When I took office, we had 5 Superfund or surplus sites here that had been on the EPA's list since 1983, and we had done nothing with them. Now all 5 of them are actually cleaned up. But we needed an office in the government that needed to be more responsive to the people that were here. As you can see, as you've seen in our town, we have a plethora of what we refer to as starter castles on the mountains around here, very upper-end houses. For every 10,000 square foot house that gets built here, it roughly creates 3 minimum wage jobs. So as we were building out as a town in the 80s and 90s, we were not balancing our housing with the demand that we had for workforce housing. And in my opinion, which is one of the reasons I ran for office, it's that workforce that creates who we are. And that workforce, regardless of if it's a teacher or a maid or a lift operator, is due respect and is due a place to live in this community. It's kind of a different, thanks. It's somewhat of a different paradigm because most ski resorts in Vail, Aspen, all of those people live 30 miles downstream and get bused into town. And we wanted to create something here that, one, acknowledges that we're a funky little mountain town, and two, that socioeconomic diversity is one of the most important things to us in terms of being successful. So part of the deal with the sustainability department was, as soon as we got that done, let's go to the community and create the vision. Then we will determine our budgets and how we work as a government based on the demands of what the citizens want. What a rare and unique system it is. It's the Tao of duh is what I get to do. I'm still speaking Chinese a little bit. Everything is ethereal. But, and so what we did was we spent 2.5 years engaging the community in terms of what is your vision. And typically on community visioning, you know, a town of our size, approximately 8,000 people, if you got 50 people to participate, that was considered a success. We got 500 people to participate. And we asked them like 7 questions. Why are you here? What keeps you here? What are you proud of? What are you disappointed in? What would make you leave? What should we do better? And one of the biggest issues was do better environmentally. And so from 1999 to today, the voters have taxed themselves to the tune of $40 million and said, rather than arguing with developers, go buy it. So we just went over 7,000 acres around the city that is permanently protected through conservation easements. And this is the interesting philosophy because our economic development and future is not based on what we build, it's based on what we don't build. That's why people come here. And so, yes, we have very nice lodging and very nice facilities, but that's not the key reason why people come here. That's a major paradigm shift from the development goals in the 80s and 90s. And so, so we've tried to move ahead in that area. And then the other idea with sustainability was we were kind of hit and missing. Let's get a grant and put some solar. Let's try some ground source heat pumps. And then what we decided was let's base everything we do on carbon. So let's do the carbon footprint of both the city government and of our city and actually start looking at where carbon comes from and what we do. What we thought was, and I think some of you have heard, we have the first biofuels bus system in the state of Utah. And although I now have issues with converting food to biofuels, so we're looking at where do we go from here. But one of the biggest things that we found was that our main source of carbon in this community, it's not our transportation system, it's pumping water. Because we move water 4,000 feet up. And so one of the things, so we started looking at, okay, what can we do to offset some of that? Well, not only do we move it up, but it comes down. So we started installing turbines in the downhill pipelines to offset the cost of powering them and pumping them overhill. So we just created a new pipeline, brought some water into town, that we're offsetting about 40% of the cost of pumping it uphill by turning turbines when we're bringing it downhill. So great ideas, and a lot of them come from people in the community that have moved here, young kids that have just graduated that show up and, I've got this brilliant idea, let's try it. As you drive around town, you'll see right above Main Street, there's a road that parallels Main Street called Sweet Alley, and right above there is an old brick WPA schoolhouse. That is our City Hall. And City Hall's got 100 panels, solar array on the roof, and we had to remodel it 3 years ago for earthquake safety. We took it off the natural gas grid, and we put ground source heat pumps in it. So this is a 14,000 square foot building that our monthly average heating and cooling bills are $280. The Tao of duh. And it was a 17-year-old kid that came and said, you should be looking at ground source heat pumps. So one of the things I think we're trying to do as a community, and in my presentations about town, I say, oh, we're a mountain town. I want to show you an endangered species. And the first picture is of a Latina housekeeper. And the second one is of a teacher. And showing them that, you know, and we talked about it in this conference because what's this have to do with biodiversity? Well, isn't the human interaction with its surrounding part of biodiversity, and isn't the varied social structure of a community part of biodiversity? Me thinks yes. And so it was one, a great trip to China, but two, what an exciting town to be able to participate in terms of trying to create a vision. This last year, our state legislature passed a resolution saying that as Utahns, we don't believe in climate change. It has no force of law. It's just a statement. Needless to say, we have been doing snow modeling here for 40 years. We believe in it. And we do think that there are things happening, and we do think things are changing. And our former governor, John Huntsman, who was the U.S. ambassador to China and the most unsuccessful but eloquent of the Republican candidates for president, you know, he got it. As a governor, he created a blue ribbon panel. We talked about what we can do in terms of climate change for 2 years. And it took us 6 months to stop arguing the issue. And finally, everyone in the room decided, you know what, let's have the 3 universities in the state of Utah come up with a 1-page statement about climate change. The first sentence was, it's real, we caused it, we could do something about it. So that gave this committee of the governors, the Blue Ribbon Panel, the ability to stop arguing science from a bunch of non-scientists and move ahead with what we should do as a state. As soon as that project was done, the legislature said, we're not even going to read it. So they never even read the results of 2 years of work. And this was everything from Rocky Mountain Power to SUA, which is an organization trying to save wilderness in southern Utah. It was the most disparate group of people that came up with a document that we all agreed to, but we couldn't get it moved forward. So we do have, there's the downside. The upside is that there's 5 or 6 mayors in the state of Utah whose communities are based on tourism and based on outdoor activity that actually do have some comprehension of there is science involved in this and there is some things we can do about it. So anyway, I will leave with the fact that we love that you're here. This is a fantastic community. As we move forward as a town, we are always looking for other ways of trying to keep our economy running. When I took office, 80% of our business happened in 100 days. Really not sustainable. And so one of the things that we said was, well, why don't we figure out a way to invite people here in the summer? So you are positive economic development for us. But one of the things we did was we have 400 miles of trails around the city that is part of the open space, all with public access. Why don't we invite people to that? Why don't we bring more music in here? Why don't we have more cultural events? And so that, in the last 10 years, that has gone from 80-20 to 60-40. Our restaurants no longer close for a month and a half in the winter because they're busy. And now we're hitting one of the first things we did was we stole the Western Girls Fast Pitch World Series. It's my mother. I didn't call her at 9. But anyway, that brought 350 fast pitch softball teams here in July. For us, that's 80% occupancy in the summer. So giving reasons for people to come here in the summer, and that was one of the things in China was, look at, we are centrally located in the West, and we would love to bring you here. So we are thrilled you're here. I heard the reports this morning. You guys did a great job on Main Street last night, and I thank you for the economic inputs to our community. I think we made about $7,000 in tax income off of your guys' libations last night. So have a great conference, and we're thrilled you're here.